There lurked a man of many mysteries within the Empire. This man was Tatsuya Kondou, an otherworlder, and he knew every secret among its inner workings. He, indeed, was the darkness of the Imperial capital. His short black hair, with bangs gently flowing into his eyes, softened his otherwise tensive demeanor. At first glance, he looked like a fine young man, someone in his early 20s. Beneath it all, however, his heart was cold. The eyes on his emotionless face glowed with a sharp light, as if piercing his enemies and seeing through all. That was to be expected. Tatsuya Kondou, or First Lieutenant Kondou, didn't look his age. Here in the Imperial capital, otherworlders weren't so rare. This was because the Empire had a policy of protecting otherworlders and gathered them in its capital from all over the world. This policy was what saved Tatsuya and so many others. This world had magic, and that was the reason why he had been saved. Over 70 years ago, Tatsuya put his life on the line for his country, as he engaged in a suicide attack against the enemy's naval strike fleet. He wasn't one to argue the merits of that operation. Reflecting back on the situation, he had believed that it was the only way forward. When he thought about his comrades who valiantly sacrificed their lives, he wished he could find meaning in what they did. This was the reason why Tatsuya would go on to always remember them. In order to let his comrades live within him to never forget his memories of them, he stayed as a first lieutenant, which was his rank at that time. He was racing towards his death as it came time for him to launch his suicide attack, but when he was engulfed in the blinding light and heat of the explosion, he somehow found himself in another world. He lived despite staring death straight in the eye. The Emperor himself was the one who saved him. Fortune had smiled upon him that day. Tatsuya appeared in a garden that only the Emperor and a few close associates could enter. And as it happened, the Emperor was relaxing there. Interesting. This must be a twist of fate. Those were the last words Tatsuya heard before his consciousness faded. When he awoke, he realized that his body was devoid of any blemishes or scratches from before. Tatsuya's luck had saved his life. So, in order to return the favor, he pledged the life he had once wasted to the Emperor. The power he awakened from crossing worlds and facing death, Tatsuya dedicated it all to him. And to this day, that was the only thing he lived for. He never stepped into the spotlight. He didn't grow old. In fact, he still looked exactly the same as the day he'd arrived. He resided in the darkness of the Empire, in other words, the intelligence headquarters, which lurked in the shadows of the Imperial capital. The specter that fed on information. The man who lurked in the shadow of the Empire. The man who was accompanied by fiends. The man of many names that was First Lieutenant Kondou. He was the head of the Imperial Intelligence Agency. None of the corps commanders dared to make light of his existence, as they had never actually seen who he really was. Gadra had sent Shinji and his team to conquer the dungeon, and of course, the Imperial Intelligence Agency was well informed of this information. First Lieutenant Kondou was a taciturn man. Thank you had been his brief remark and nothing more. The informants, accustomed to this, bowed and promptly left. The First Lieutenant was not the kind of man to express his thoughts to other people. The report contained detailed information about Yuki's subordinates. There were more than 1,000 otherworlders gathered from every part of the world. Less than 10% of them did not awaken a unique skill. Those people were leading a peaceful life in the Empire's capital. More than 10% had awakened a unique skill designed for combat. Over 100 otherworlders chose to join the army corps that matched their individual characteristics. The rest of them were offered places of employment according to their specialties, where their work greatly varied. This time, the subject was about the combat-type otherworlders. Yuuki Kagurazaka was the man who created the Freedom Association in the Western nations. Until a year ago, he made full use of his power as the Grand Master to protect the otherworlders as best he could. That was what Yuuki self-reported. Yet, according to investigations, it was a lie. He buttered up the Rosso family and exploited their power. In the West, forbidden summonings of otherworlders were conducted. And from the investigation, there was a massive number of summoners who performed them. Otherwise, it was inconceivable that such a large number of people specialized in combat would appear. Moreover, it was possible to ensure the obedience of these summoned otherworlders through a curse. As such, summoning was the best way to prepare subordinates who would never betray their master. Those otherworlders were scattered across each corps. The alarming implications dawned on First Lieutenant Kondou. That insight was right on the mark. His mental acuity was terrifying, one might say. And as a matter of fact, his fears were justified. The results were evident in this report. Based on Yuki's words, deeds, and actions since moving to the Empire, it was determined that there was a huge probability of him staging a coup d'etat. Furthermore, the people that Yuki sent in had all been identified. Thanks to his achievements, the Empire granted Yuki asylum. Despite that, he didn't appear to cherish the Empire's kindness, since he was making efforts to expand his influence as he pleased. He dispatched the people that became his followers to each of the army corps. And to top it all off, some of them were accredited by the glorious Imperial Knights. The other corps weren't that much of a concern, but harboring traitors among the Imperial Guardians, charged with protecting His Imperial Majesty, was beyond the pale. To First Lieutenant Kondou, this kind of situation wasn't one to be overlooked. How dangerous, Yuuki Kagurazaka, it seems like I must eliminate you. First Lieutenant Kondou made up his mind, but now wasn't the time. He had to wait a while longer before making his move. Intel revealed that the Archmage Master Gadra was connected to Yuuki. This information had been corroborated, but it remained unclear just how deep their relationship went. Needless to say, Master Gadra was an important figure to the Empire. Although it seemed unlikely for him to commit treason, Kondou knew that the reason why Master Gadra and the Empire had a cooperative relationship solely came down to his goals aligning with the principles of the Empire. Taking that at face value, it was conceivable that a conflict of interest might arise down the line. In that case, that old man will also pose a significant threat. If so, Yuuki and Gadra. The former had the build of a young boy, yet his conduct indicated a far greater wealth of experience. Like with Kondou, it was dangerous to judge him by appearance alone. The latter was an old man in appearance. In truth, he was a mysterious person who had been walking the earth for over a millennium. Challenging such a man required more than a half-hearted attempt. This was the motivation behind why he gathered information. Evidence had been piling up, but it was still not enough. He couldn't make any open moves just yet. Each and every otherworlder under Yuuki's care would be scrutinized with a fine-tooth comb. And then, they would be examined to see if any of them were dominated by the curse. Nevertheless, if Yuuki or Gadra showed any unnatural signs, then when that time comes, don't expect a public trial. First Lieutenant Kondou, the man who worked in the shadow of the Empire, had anything but mercy in store for traitors. Dance for the Empire. Your lives are already in the palm of my hand. In the darkness of the Imperial capital, his eyes shone with a cold light, as First Lieutenant Kondou muttered quietly to himself. A one-eyed man sat in a posh chair in an office with a luxurious desk. He was a skinny man in his 40s and wore an eye patch over his left eye. His name was Calgurio, and he was the commander of the Armored Corps, which took pride in being the most powerful force within the Empire. On the desk in front of him lay several magic crystals. These magic crystals, which were a source of magical energy, were of high purity and quality. Thanks to the technique Yuuki introduced, magic crystals could be refined into magic stones. By purifying the magic crystal extracted from the core of a monster, one could produce a magic stone, which could store magical energy. There were also natural magic stones dropped by monsters. That said, these could only be extracted from individuals who possessed an enormous magical content, such as A-rank monsters and higher. Such natural magic stones were of incomparably high quality, and were commonly used as ornaments or magic catalysts, rather than as fuel. Without a regular supply of them available, they had no value as an energy source. Calgurio reached for the magic crystal on his desk and picked it up. The closer he examined it, the more readily apparent its brilliant quality became to him. With a heavy heart, he placed the magic crystal back down, longing for that sensation he felt while holding it. Reaching out, he instead grabbed the accompanying report that was delivered to him alongside the crystal. It was a summary of the Research Institute's findings. With a magic crystal of this purity, 100 Empire-made magic stones could be produced. It was so pure that it could even be converted into energy without further refinement. To collect samples this immaculate, one had to slay monsters of rank B or higher. That was what the report had concluded. You, Gadra. He erupted furiously. Don't you dare think you can hide this cash cow from me. He had paid off the research staff so that they would let him know when something amiss had happened, which led to this astonishing report. Gadra had brought in these magic crystals fairly recently. It was unknown where he got them, but judging from the number, it could be surmised that he found a colony of monsters. Regardless, they were all first class in quality, and further testing showed that they contained roughly equal amounts of energy. It wasn't possible to harvest the same consistent quality from different kinds of monsters. The grade of the crystals would inevitably vary between them. Consequently, it was necessary to refine and process them into magic stones. On the contrary, the magic crystals before him were surprisingly uniform. This was a strong indication towards them stemming from a pack of monsters of the same race. He doubted there was a possibility for them to domesticate whatever monsters produced these crystals, but thought that it would improve the energy situation of the Empire if they engaged in regular raids. However, it was apparently more complicated than that. Calgurio's face twisted with burning desire. If we aim to acquire a sustainable supply of energy, it will be paramount for us to secure the place that produces these magic crystals, the report concluded. Rather than listing possible locations where such a habitat may be found, they had already secured a fix on the precise location. That place being the dungeon, rumored to be in the domain of Demon Lord Rimuru. Recently, he's been so chummy with that runt Yuuki that he doesn't even pay me a visit anymore. I can't let you milk that golden cow all on your own and get away with it. That's unforgivable. This was the cause of Calgurio's foul mood. As it would happen, that wasn't even the end of it. Calgurio heard an interesting story from the high-class nobles whom he was friends with. They came over in great numbers, and, with wicked smiles on their faces, they relayed the information to him. According to their report, Gadra ventured out to investigate the labyrinth, and lost 3 of his disciples while there. Had that been all there was to it, then there would have been little more to do than pay their condolences. Yet, what Gadra brought back with him was the problem. Apparently, he didn't only bring back the magic crystals, but some other loot, too. The sword that Calgurio had displayed in his room was immaculate. It was made of high quality, pure magisteel, and the forging technique spoke of a masterful craftsman. It was a magnificent sword, one that could rival those forged by the best craftsmen of the Dwarven Kingdom. No, if you considered the quality of the material, this one came out on top. The ones circulated within the Empire were a far cry from it. The noblemen had brought with them swords of exquisite quality, which, after some consideration, Calgurio bought. One of the 3 swords was sent to his course technical team for examination. These are very rare items, and they may have some kind of mysterious effect, you know. The nobleman proudly presented them to Calgurio in the most grandiose and overblown fashion, in a transparent effort to sell them. This was despite the fact that these goods were offered to them by Gadra himself. When Calgurio asked them what Gadra's demand was, they would feign indifference and reply with suspicious remarks like, "Of course, we can't answer that, can we?" In the end, he purchased each sword for 100 gold coins, or 300 gold coins in total. Regardless, there remained something in the back of his mind that bothered him. The fact that he was offered 3 swords eventually gave him a hint, but Calgurio was born a low-class noble, but was able to climb the ranks all the way up to Corps Commander through his innate talent. The Empire was a society based on absolute meritocracy. Thus, Calgurio held a higher position than a regular high-class noble, whose standing was predicated on their social status. Under normal circumstances, merely speaking to a noble of high rank was unthinkable. But even for such a personage, being courteous to Calgurio was essential. "I know they are looking down on me deep inside, but that doesn't matter. What's important is how I get the most use out of them." High-class nobles would be careful never to act without regard for their own interests. There was no way they told him such information with honest intentions. It was too good to be true.